All right, to begin the debate, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, am I audible? Am I visible?
Yes to both.
All right. Wait, let me get to my timer. All right. I'll start my speech in three, two, one. Panel, what do you need to understand about this motion that imagine a world where children are just exposed to this romantic storyline that are either unnecessary or just irrelevant and actually have this unhealthy expectations for children about what romantic that should actually be about. Now, let's talk about the characterization a bit. What romantic storylines are about, right? They have having this weird dynamics that are usually heteronormative. Usually heteronormative and also male centric, even usually have this happily ever after notion that are it's easy to get in relationships are you don't have to put much effort, it's all about what you feel inside, and they have this very very vague expectations and vague realistic realization that doesn't really talk about how unrealistic it is actually for these kids to understand. In children's movies, romantic storylines typically involve like these two characters who develop like feelings for each other and they want a romantic relationship. This have this like dating or in terms of Frozen, like courtship, falling in love, and romantic storylines in like children's. They are produced in a variety of ways. It can be light and innocent or more mature than complex. And the matrix is which house can prove that romantic storylines is more harmful of good or more good than harm in children's movies. So what is the burden I want to push up today? Why is opposition okay with kids living in a world that puts a pressure on relationship and puts unhealthy expectations and unrealistic relationships in movies? So let's talk about what is my first argument. My first argument is that romantic storylines may contribute to unrealistic and unhealthy expectations about relationship. First substantive. Children's movies that include romantic storylines, they portray these unhealthy, unrealistic ideas about love and relationships, such as the idea that love is easy, or this can which is like problems can be easily resolved. We need to understand that humans are complex. Humans, we went through different kind of experiences, and we are as toxic as we can be, and sometimes we are also when we get into relationship we can bring that to it, and it's not as easy that this romantic can this movies this kids movies with romantic storylines that actually talks about this can create this false expectation and that cause children to have like unrealistic unrealistic ideas, right? For example, movies this kind of movies, they have like gender stereotypes, and reinforce harmful gender roles. For example, like even during this Lion King, Simba has to fight for everything, and Nala seems like just nothing in that movie in the storyline. So what happened? These movies that portray men as strong and dominant, and women as submissive and passive. They can contribute to the idea that these are the only acceptable gender roles. And what happens with the third substantive, which brings me to the third substantive, is like it also can contribute to the objectification of women and sexualization of children for this romantic storyline. Why? Like women that are they portray women as objects to be born or conquered or contributed to the idea that women are only valuable for their appearances or like sexual attractiveness and whatnot. Which brings me to the second argument. Romantic storylines may take away from more important themes and messages in children's movie. We need to understand that these children's movies, even for example, Frozen, is about sisterhood, is about doing the right thing. It's about being careful for caring for your siblings and whatnot. But at the end, due to this, love is an open door comes off, and there's this another guy who's like helping her. It takes away what actually meaning about this romantic storyline. They're actually not necessary. Why? The first objective is that these important themes and messages are meant to teach valuable lessons and promote like positive values. However, the inclusion of these romantic storylines, they take away from these important themes and messages, and the focuses rather shift towards the romance rather than most important themes, which also talks about the shipping culture even. Because, for example, let's talk about this Mulan. Mulan saved the entire China, but when she went home, her grandma was happy with that, but she was also happy with another thing. She saw a handsome man that wants to marry her. It's funny, it's light-hearted, but this will promote this shipping culture, which then will make it even harder for people to see the important message rather than what's exactly necessary about. The inclusion of these romantic storylines may also limit the type of stories that can be told in children's movies, as romance may become a more dominant theme rather than the important issue. For example, friendship, family, personal growth, this kind of thing. They also limit the third substantive is like they also limit the representation of different type of relationships in children's movie. So movies that focus on romantic relationship may exclude the portrayal or like other important types of relationship also, which brings me to the third argument. children might not be that developmentally ready to understand or handle the complexities of romantic storylines. Why would I say that? First, children's movies are often targeted towards younger audience. A younger audience do not have like the cognitive development or like how mature this emotional they have to be emotionally to understand and handle this kind of like romantic storylines. Why? Children's movies that include romantic may expose to younger children to like mature themes and concepts that they may not be ready, and it might be hard to understand or even cope with. Like movies that portray heartbreak or infidelity may be causing like very disturbing for younger children. So it also creates this unnecessary pressure or confusion for children who are not developmentally ready to deal with romantic feelings in the first place. Why would I say that, right? Imagine that you just saw a movie that had these romantic storylines and you think, oh, this is what's normal. Everyone should be having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Everyone should be having some kind of romantic relationship. And it is very fast for these kids who don't even understand what relationships are mainly about to just get into it. And there's this kind of unnecessary pressure that actually happens. So just to be preemptive, right? They might say that, that no, this romantic, it doesn't matter because they're done in an age appropriate way. It's not we have this mature themes or concept, and it's also that. But what they actually do not understand is that this impact is very important because these storylines have a bigger impact on younger children who don't understand how to cope with it and how not to like act with it. With that, this children's movie, right? They create that's why we see that this create like this unnecessary pressure in the first place. The second preemptive, what they can say that sorry, the children's movie that also like they really talk about heartbreaks or infidelity that really younger people, these are kids we're talking about, they might not really understand about it. And that's why we believe that it is important that romantic relationship does more harm than good actually. So let's talk about, in a comparison in their side. Now we have kids who do not understand the depth of romantic, but they now want to get into the relationship. They might understand that they might think that relationships are easy. It creates an unnecessary expectation and whatnot. In our world, by taking this romantic out, we now seeing kids who actually want to be kids, who actually see there's more than love. We actually see kids who are understand what is going on. And with that, I will actually end my speech. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech, the Prime Minister. To begin the opposition case, I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Yeah, just give me a second. Let me just type out one last thing. Okay, let me get a timer open. Just 1 minute. Can I confirm if I'm audible?
Yep, you're audible.
All right, I'd like to start off in 3, 2, 1. I think this debate has boiled down into a set of straw man's best case scenarios and uncharitable characterization to the extent that it's almost like the portrayal of the movies that we're discussing has gone far too unrealistic. I think we can start off and take out a lot of the bulk of what Proposition said in their speech because most of it related to expectations. I don't necessarily agree. I think most movies will have unorthodox looking characters to begin with. Like, I don't really understand how you get false expectations by looking at Nala and Simba from The Lion King or Dory and Nemo from Finding Nemo. I don't understand how that's supposed to make you think you're supposed to fall in love with like an A-grade, perfect looking person. But I don't think this is necessarily an issue that's exclusive to movies. Like, you look at Tom Cruise and you tell me that's an average looking man and that's not bad expectations, and suddenly we'll have a very different discussion. So the whole idea of people in movies looking good is not exclusive to kids' movies. This is a problem with movies altogether, and we don't claim that issue at all. But also, I think there's a lot of things that are said from Proposition's case that are so dependent on us believing best case scenarios or just, like extreme buy-ins. They talk about how kids will have unrealistic expectations, essentially, how their gender roles are less likely to, how their gender roles will they'll buy into gender roles, how kids will, like how kids are basically going to be worse people or whatever. But I think you need to remember that most of these movies came out at times when these gender roles were either relevant or very prominent, like the examples they gave, like Mulan, for instance. But let's talk about status quo. What does the world look like right now in a more progressive world where movies seem to be liberalized and recontextualized, and we see what people actually look like? I think a perfect example is Turning Red, a coming of age story for women. I think we lose the potential of amazing good because of a history of some movies maybe portraying characters in a bad way. We literally lose the potential to portray really compelling, realistic narratives, teach kids good mannerisms and ethics just because of a past of some movies potentially being bad. Even if they exist, do you really mean to tell me that movies will constantly stay this way? Will movies not evolve over time? And I also think they took away a lot of best case scenarios, like they talk about Mulan. But I think, like most of the people that watched Mulan don't really care about the romance to begin with. Like, you mean to tell me if you talk about The Lion King, you're worried about Nala and Simba's relationship and not La Hakuna Matata? I'm from Tanzania. Every time a tourist comes over there, all they tell us about is Hakuna Matata. Nobody asks us about Simba and Nala. I think there's so many different best case scenarios like heartbreak and infidelity. What movies that are kids show you heartbreak and infidelity? These are kids' movies. We're not talking about adult movies. This is just another instance of them squirreling the motion or using strawmans to get the best case scenario. Everyone should have some kind of romantic relationship, he says. It's almost like they watched Frozen and saw an orgy. I think Prop is sensitive. I think Lion King is a perfect example of showing how sensitive Prop is. Instead of talking about how it teaches you how to grieve, how it teaches you how to learn, how to let go, how to grow, they think about how apparently it teaches you how to look for good-looking lions in the wild. But I think in totality, what opposition tells you in this debate is far more realistic than what proposition tells you, because movies only make for a small percentage of kids' exposure to love. Like, they already have exposure to love irregardless of movies. The love shown in these movies are generally healthy, controlled narratives, and they're probably quite appropriate because they have to go through lengthy checking processes. As long as it's not inappropriate, kids won't consume it, right? And anyways, kids are exposed to love as it is. You probably have seen your parents kiss, and not if not your parents, some random guy on the street or your uncle and aunt. You will, at some given point in time, the 13 years that you grow out of being a child, will have seen people kiss and or be romantic. Furthermore, the love in this movie satisfy their curiosity. They're less likely to explore curiosity on their own. They're given a framework of what love should look like. So this debate inherently is about harms and benefits. So what are the harms on side proposition's side? They depend on the best case scenarios. I think we've done a very good job to engage how they don't exist at all. I think a lot of them are dependent on us believing things that are just not true in status quo. Maybe, yeah, the standards of 1950, maybe it was bad then, but now it's a very different story. The harms on our side don't exist, but we tell you there are a lot of benefits. Like, for instance, the portrayal of love in these movies are checked by associations with degrees in child psychology. They don't just finish the movie and send it out to cinemas. Rather, there is an extensive checking process that makes sure that these movies are safe and healthy for kids to see. I think this diminishes their whole ideology of how it would lead to cognitive confusion for kids. So, there's a government process that literally deduces whether or not these movies are inappropriate. So essentially, all of these movies are checked beforehand to make sure they're healthy for kids. So again, I think that is also kind of nullified. Movies with romance, romantic narratives in kids movies give kids the framework for healthy relationships. They show a portrayal of love that is not unhealthy. It's not inappropriate. It doesn't tempt kids into falling in love by any means. It just shows kids why love is why love is necessary, why it's good. It shows them that love can be this beautiful emotion. It promotes empathy. Movies like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Beauty and the Beast don't necessarily tempt kids into believing they need to get married to like A-grade models. It teaches kids not to objectify other people. There's so many movies with constant examples of how ugly is beautiful in an odd way. These movies teach people not to judge. Like, again, I can't speak about it enough, but The Hunchback of Notre Dame or Beauty and the Beast, it shows that looks aren't everything. It teaches people about the importance of picking somebody with a good personality. That, for instance, in Frozen, where I think Elsa falls in love with somebody who's not very nice and then goes crazy. It also shows like a framework of what healthy relationships look like, what teenage love should look like for people who are slightly older. I think all in all, we've shown you so many so many benefits on our side of the house. We've done an effective job to nullify the harms that we're seeing on side propositions. With less than 30 seconds left, I beseech the judges in this debate. I think for us to win this debate, for us to be winner POV through and through, what do we need to prove to you in this speech? I think we've proven to you how the harms on their side are easily nullified are not realistic, are dependent on best case scenarios, generally are lies, are like coping mechanisms, or just extremely sensitive, people nitpicking into movies, taking small aspects of it and trying to blow them out of proportion. I think we've effectively shown you how the benefits on our side will always outweigh the harms on theirs. I think we've shown you an effective example of what status quo will look like and how these movies will evolve and only get better over time. I'm so proud to oppose. Please vote for side opposition if you vote for a side that like Lion King or something.
Thank you to the leader of opposition for that speech. To conclude the OG case, I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to state that my name is Maisara. My pronouns are she, her, and I prefer verbal POIs, if that's all right. Okay, so I shall begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So here as part of the opening opposition, I'm here to justify why romance in kids movies are harmful. But first of all, I'm going to have to settle a few rebuttals from opposition, in which, you know, how can kids glean like romantic themes in movies with animals in them, like Marlin and Dory from Finding Nemo, like Simba and Nala. First of all, that is underestimating the intelligence of kids. Kids already are at an age where they can play pretend, and like kids can enjoy movies like Turning Red. Like using your example, you don't have to be a red panda or turn into a red panda to be able to relate to all the issues that the protagonist has with romance, with wanting like connection with people. And even then, romance was never the center of that movie anyway. And then secondly, I would like to address that, you know, kids don't always like their point where like kids don't always see the romance in movies, where like, you know, when it comes to the Lion King, they don't think of Simba and Nala, they think of like Hakuna Matata and all that stuff. However, it is an overarching pattern in a lot of children's movies, like Disney movies, where they may not like see it consciously, they may not think about it consciously, but subconscious ideas have always been present and prevalent, and like these subconscious biases seep into society, where, you know, kids can like make fun of each other for you know, not being in, like, kids when they grow up, like as teenagers, they can make fun of one another for like, if they have friends of a different gender, they're like, oh, you're a couple, right? Come on, don't lie to me. Like, a lot of teasing can happen there. There's a lot of pressure when it comes to falling in love at a certain age as well, where like when kids grow up to be adults and they don't have like a romantic partner yet, there's also, they would feel like, you know, their lives aren't fulfilled, their lives aren't like the movies. They start developing this very cynical view of life, just because they are unable to attain this one aspect of life that isn't the end all and be all of everything. Because at the end of the day, romance isn't the end all and be all. Like, there are so many other forms of love that are not limited to romance. Like, even you have love of community, you have love of friendship, you have family members who support them in life, who are taking them to places in life. You have friends where like, yeah, haha, I don't have a partner either. Like, they're commiserating with them, and is that union that like makes their life feel more fulfilled. And to also rebut the belief that, you know, love teaches them not to judge, to have empathy. It's not mutually exclusive to romance either. You can have that in friendships as well. Like, when you think about one of the sequels to Cinderella, there was this minor subplot about one of the stepsisters falling in love with a baker. Both of them are unconventionally attractive, and yet they are able to love one another. People like focus on the importance of that, how it's beautiful, how, you know, you don't have to be conventionally attractive to love one another, even if you're mean. Like, you have people who can still see the beauty in you. How about the empathy between Cinderella and Anastasia? Like, Cinderella has empathic to Anastasia as well. But that doesn't get recognition because it's not a romantic relationship. It's not a bond between sisters that has happened before. And basically it shows how limited the frameworks of love are when it comes to romance, where because of that focus, where because of that happy ending, they don't show what happens after you get your partner. They don't show that like people fight. They don't show how people resolve the issues after getting that happily ever after. Without the ability for conflict resolution, they're going to inherently believe that, you know, there's something wrong with the love that they have. They're going to feel like there's something wrong with other people when they just never learn how to address their own flaws and how to address the flaws of other people. And because they're unable to address these flaws, they're just constantly looking for this perfect person that's going to fix their problems, that's going to fix themselves. And because they're not, and because like these people don't feel whole themselves, when they break up, they're gonna feel like this whole they're gonna feel like they're torn in half. They feel like because they've lost their other half, that like the world ends, when there's so much more that goes there's so much more that goes into love than this. You have to overcome like breakups like this. You need to have self-love. You need to have self-love even before you enter romance, because at the end of the day, we are not condemning romance as a whole. We are just condemning the way that kids movies shape these perceptions of romance in society. At the end of the day, we are just saying that in order to have we are just saying that romance in kids movies can pose a problem because it portrays this more ideal way of presenting romance, because it needs to be more simple for kids to understand. Things can't be complicated, or you know, it's gonna fly over their heads. It's things that they have to learn later in life. So and it can be dangerous because kids are the most impressionable. What sticks to them now is going to affect them later. And with all of this, I'm just going to state that romance in kids movies can be hard because unrealistic expectations of romance being held at a very impressionable age where everything sticks to them. Secondly, I'm going to state that romance like doesn't really address how to like resolve flaws, how to resolve conflict. They just focus on looking at the perfect one, and if no one's perfect, then they're totally alone. And lastly, romance isn't just like not being to attain romance. That isn't just an unrealistic expectation of how to feel fulfilled in life. There's so much more, and it creates this unnecessary sense of isolation, not just for themselves, but like for the rest of life itself. And with that, I will end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. To conclude the opening half of this debate, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
My speech.
Sorry, could you repeat the sentence?
Okay, is this loud enough?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Wait. Can you give me a second to set up my timer? Okay. Okay. All right. So, my name is Wendy, and my preferred gender pronouns are she, her, and my preferred method of POI is that you type POI in the chat, and I'll take it when I can. So, my speech starts in 3, 2, 1. So, who is the main stakeholder of today? Children. So, today our side has to prove why having these romantic storylines in children's movies would be the best for children. So, today my speech will go like this. First, I will go on to some rebuttals to what the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister said, and then I will go into my main argument. So, the opposition, I think this was the government, I think this was the Prime Minister. She talked about how children might have unnecessary, irrelevant, and unhealthy expectations to relationships, because these movies portray happily ever after and that relationships are perfect and easy. So they are painting children's movies in a light where they always portray perfect relationships. They always portray perfect fairy tales. That may have been the case in the past, but we have to understand that kids movies nowadays, they are gaining depth. For example, in Frozen, it showed that Prince Han was perfect and he ended up being toxic. This may actually be good. Like, for example, what my leader of opposition has said, like, for example, this may teach them how to identify when a relationship is abusive, when a relationship has red flags. So even, okay, let's say in the worst case scenario, even if they are perfect fairy tales, it can teach children positive romantic illusion, which is something that can actually help their relationships in the future. Like, there's nothing wrong of thinking, for example, your partner is more handsome than he actually is, or something like that. And yes, it's possible that they may idealize their future partners. But again, this is something that can happen on their side too. For example, when they look at their parents, or they look at for example, when they grow up and they look at adult movies, like, they can still be influenced. They can still be influenced by, for example, adult movies, because there's also a lot of adult movies that idealize their future partner, idealize partners and stuff like that. And also, they talked about how romantic storylines shifts attention away from important themes in the stores, in the movies and stuff like that. But why this is not necessarily the case. Like, for example, what my prime minister has already said, like, for example, there can be, like, for example, friendship being a more important theme, even though there is a romantic storyline in the story. And also, they talked about how, for example, children are not ready to handle the complexities of a relationship, and that, you know, there are also heartbreak and infidelity, which may confuse them and stuff like that. So are you saying that because something is complex, it should be completely hidden from children, and we should wait for them to grow up and then suddenly be faced with romantic difficulties with, like, no prior mental preparation or stuff like that? I would like to say that exposure is better than no exposure. If they are exposed to these romantic relationships on TV since they are young, they will be more mentally prepared to face relationships. Yes, you can get exposure from your parents for romantic relationships. This exists on both sides, but that's just one romantic relationship you can model and sample in your life. Like, what if your parents are abusive? What if your parents are toxic? Like, for example, if these kids movies, they don't portray romantic relationship, and that's the only romantic relationship you will see when you are growing up. So this may be even worse. Like, kids movies showing many different types of romantic dynamics that are possible is a thing that only exists on our side. Like, showing these many different types of relationships and how and how there are different dynamics, it will be even better for children, because they have more things to more examples to look at. For example, when they are, for example, what they said, shaping their romantic like these movies can shape their romantic perception. So having these many different types of relationship dynamics that they can look at is actually better. And also, they talked about how there can be subconscious bias, like kids may make fun of others when kids have friends of a different gender or stuff like that. So opposition is trying to pin the whole issue of heteronormativity in society on kids movies. Yes, kids movies that portray heterosexual relationships may promote heteronormativity. However, this is a small harm compared to, for example, children learning about, like what I said, numerous relationship dynamics, like what abusive relationships look like, how to identify red flags. Yes, like, for example, promoting heteronormativity, it can be an unfortunate side product of, for example, having these romantic storylines in kids movies. But like in the future or something like that, like movie industries can also come up with movies that portray homosexuality when it is something that is even more accepted. Because imagine if someone's parents are bigoted, or they are bigoted, they are homophobic, they may prevent, like, for example, stop their children from looking at movies that they know have these for example, homosexual elements in it. So it's not something you can pin on just children's movies too, because like even if they are like homosexual in elements, like that might be something that parents would not want their children to see too. So like in the end, even if there are movies that portray these things, they might be, like, for example, barred from children. So heteronormativity is not something that is just caused by children's movies. And also they talked about how children may feel like the world is ending when relationships end, because like these movies, they portray romance as like something that is very important. But just because kids movies do not portray romantic relationships on their side, this does not mean that for example, they won't experience heartbreak just because, or like will experience like this feeling about like their life is ending because the relationships are ending. Like they may feel this way, not just because kids movies portray romantic relationships. They may, for example, want something that their parents have, and therefore feel like romance is a very important part of their life. And also, there is really nothing wrong with making romance as a priority in their life. Like, for example, some people, their goal in life is to start a family, is to find a partner. And there's also nothing wrong with that, right? And now I'll go into my main argument, which is that since we both sides have talked about how children are prone to, for example, mimicking things they see on TV, we have to understand, like, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, they can also learn about how much a person can care about another. They can learn about unconditional love. They can learn about how one person can take care of another person so well. For example, in Frozen, Kristoff was always there for Anna even when they were friends, and it showed how love can develop from a relationship. It shows how, for example, yes, there are movies that portray, for example, people falling in love at first sight, but then there are also kids movies that go against this, and it showed it can, like, basically it can build empathy and love in the child. It can embed these amazing qualities in them. It can teach them about how to, like, for example, face romantic relationships. Like, both sides, they can have movies that, for example, portray family and platonic relationships. But a thing that only exists on our side is how you can, for example, handle and love a partner well. And that's all for my speech. Thank you.
Thank you to the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. Just a reminder that after 7 minutes and 15 seconds, I will not be taking any more notes. So at that point, that was the point continuing your speech. Cool. To open the closing half of the debate, I'd like to invite the member of government. Here.
Hello. Before I start, audible? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right. Just let me get a timer here. So before I start my speech, just to remind everyone, verbal POIs, because I won't be reading the chat box throughout my speech, all right? So I'll be starting my speech then. Love is a powerful tool for storytelling. However, in the context of children's movies, recognize that in the status quo, there are several things you have to keep in mind about the time, place, and the relativity and the relevance of using using romantic storylines in children's movies. I'll be telling you more about why is it that romantic storylines actually fall flat in the context of children's movies. But before I get to that, I'll be splitting my speech into say 4 or so parts. First part will be about how we're different from our opening side, government, and second will be a bit of characterization on how all of these his looks like. Third, I'll be telling you about some of my arguments. Fourth, I'll be giving you a comparison between both cases, and I'll be weighing out how the cases coming from both sides. So before I get to that, I'll be integrating my rebuttals into my speech, and I'll flag you when I have a rebuttal. All right. So first of all, moving on to a bit of characterization that has been missing a bit throughout this entire speech, throughout this debate. First of all, it's on this idea of how romantic storylines and love. Recognize that these two things can be separated. First of all, recognize that, of course, we all know that there are several types of love. There's the love that's like family love, where you love people around you, and that's of course very different from things like romantic love, for one thing. So recognize that what's being pushed by romantic storylines is exclusively romantic love. And of course, we know that we don't let's say we don't like love our parents or our friends in the same way as we do as our significant other. So second point of characterization is about children's movies. Look, first of all, what is the purpose of children's movies? Number one, it's to impart values on children to get them to be better people, where it's supposed to be the main focus of the things. It tells children how things are supposed to work in the world. And second, this is a very important point I want you to remember. It's about the limitations of children's movies. Recognize that children's movies are movies, and movies have a certain amount of runtime they can only go by. That's to say that it's not a novel where you can just stretch it out and tell everything in excruciating detail and actually develop things properly. Recognize that directors often have to make compromises to cut down the runtime of a movie so that it can actually be put into production. So what often happens in productions is that love is what takes the brunt of the huge cut of this movie thing. So the directors say, okay, as long as we end love stories with, oh, then they live happily ever after, then people won't question it, you know? And that's what's happening in the status quo. And this is just a small part of my response to DLO about like how like some exposure is better than none. Because recognize that with such a half-baked attempt at portraying actual romantic storylines, what happens is that it turns into this other thing that isn't exactly that isn't representative of reality itself. Moving on into my argumentation. Number one is about how romantic storylines in children's movies are always exaggerated. Now, there are several premises that this argument stands on. First is on how it's oftentimes very simplified, and this is some new content coming out from closing. First of all, like in movies, you of course have to make things very simple, correct? But the thing is that it's worse in children's movies specifically because they need to make it such that children are able to understand the actual content of the movie itself. So they just put in some simple concepts like happily ever after, do good things, get the girl, and so forth. Or in Snow White, just kiss an unconscious girl and you'll get the girl. And recognize that all these concepts of like how the princess is taken away by Prince Charming and they live happily ever after, these are all simplified and exaggerated to the point where it's not even representative of reality at the end of the day. So the second premise is, why are children likely to buy in? This is in response to LO, who just said that, it's not very likely. So a bit of new content coming from us is about why are all of these things likely. I'll tell you about my second argument as well, because this is something that I think was missing from opening side. Look, recognize that number one, children are gullible and they'll always believe they'll often believe what is depicted on movies. And no, that doesn't mean that they'll go looking for attractive tigers in the woods, but no, instead they subconsciously believe things like, if I just confess and I do nothing more and I'll be able to live happy ever after. No need to put effort into relationship. And haha, I'm a genius, I can graduate from kindergarten with full credits. Look, the thing is that children, they like things that are easy to understand. And when you put love in such a way that is like in children's movies, like, you just do this and that and you get love. That's how your parents got together, right? So it makes them easy to buy. It makes it easy for them to buy in to all of his talk about how love. So what's the impact of this? Number one is on this entire idea of this false narrative. Look, this is a bunch of fake hope that will be crushed for them in adulthood. They'll be led on in life and they'll think to themselves, okay, this is the way that we do it. And at the end of the day, they'll fail because what they've been told when they were children was just simply something that was not representative of reality itself. So what ends up happening is that they fall flat. So what happens then is that like they will, of course, all of these fake hopes will be crushed later on, leaving them quite sad, of course. And they'll have like false thoughts like, how is just don't need to put effort and so forth. Before I get to my second argument, yes, you may.
Are you taking it from me or Rashka?
I'll take from Winner POV.
Okay. You talked about how that's how your parents got together, right? Like, isn't that contradicting your own point? That means that you can also want relationships because of your parents, not just romantic like storylines in kids' movies.
Look, my argument was about how like they think that this is how it actually happens because that's what was depicted. But I've already told you about how it's not actually representative of reality because time constraints and so forth, and the fact that they have to make it simplified and so forth. Second argument, but how romantic storylines take away attention from the main values of the story. Now, first premise. Now this is a bit of an extension on my opening side, but I'll give you new content as to why exactly that this is likely to happen in the first place. Because look, love is a strong force that like holds a lot of sway over human emotions, and this is powerful because it attacks our most primal instincts to be loved. Thus, attention in movies are often swayed towards the love side of things, and what happens then is that other values, they get washed out of the spotlight, especially like on kids. That is because love will be then be something new to them, and they'll be curious and like, oh, what's this love? So it ends up being something they want to experience as well. So they vicariously live their love through the characters that they see on screen, just to feel just to try to feel what love is actually like then. Oh no time. All right. What is the comparison then on both sides? Where if you have a storyline with if you have a movie with romantic storylines, it'll be the main focus, but you will also be bringing a lot of false expectations. Because you're unable to provide an accurate narrative or an accurate representation of what love is actually supposed to look like, and that's the thing at the end of the day. So the trade-off then is that sure, while you get slightly more compelling characters, the trade-off that you get on government side is that sure, while we may have like less compelling storylines, but recognize that we are able to do things like focus on actual values that people are supposed to be learning. And for all those reasons, I'm very proud to propose. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the member of government for that speech. To open the case from closing opposition, I'd like to invite the member of opposition. You're here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, sorry. Okay. My name is Adriana. My pronouns are she, her. My preferred method of taking POI is that you type POI in the chat. I'll see it and I'll ask you to say it. But if I don't answer or take any POIs by the 5th minute, please just verbally say. Okay, so sorry, starting my timer. I will be starting my speech in. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, we have to acknowledge that the entire Gov bench has had a surprisingly negative view about love when love is such a positive thing. If we look at their entire case, they tried to paint the picture of like why they tried to paint a picture of how these things are negative by taking like the absolute worst or oldest movies, when even if like all the cases hinge on examples, shouldn't the examples be of movies that are more recent or more relevant to status quo? Because those are the movies that more kids as they go on will eventually see. So a few things I'll do in my case today. I'll be taking a few important rebuttals that are important to our case, and I'll be going into arguments that may have been slightly touched on by the opening house, but we'll dive deeper into them. And I'll be giving some with unique extensions to our house, and the rest of the entire Gov bench case, the rest of the entire Gov bench case will be taken down by my whip speaker. So first, a few characterizations that I feel were lacking from this debate. So okay, what we do agree with is that the main stakeholder is children, people's perception of love, and maybe some adults who indulge in these movies. Another thing to characterize is who children are. So yes, children are people who are impressionable. They can be swayed by what they watch. But we have to understand that if something really bad were to happen to them, or they in terms of them acting out on something that is actually bad, there are parents there to intervene, or they have friends around them who would intervene. So just because I watch a movie doesn't mean I'm in an echo, that shows me not the best example, doesn't mean I'm in an echo chamber where I will necessarily act on that and do what is the unhealthiest thing for me. People around me are going to have conversations about this. People are going to have different takes. So the portrayal of romantic themes or romantic storylines in these movies does not directly or wouldn't directly lead to someone ruining their love life. And side government has failed to prove step by step how that works. So let's move into why children's movies in general is a good place to or a good place to have these romantic storylines, or what this portrayal looks like. So this portrayal looks like these love storylines can sometimes be centric, they can sometimes be related to the main plot, where let's give example of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel, all those movies with romance that is quite centric in the movie. But we also have movies like Lilo and Stitch or Brave, or Mulan, where the main plot is there and there's romantic storylines that exist. So in terms of them arguing that maybe people lose their individuality or they focus their whole personality on love, even in these movies, you have movies that don't entirely focus on love, but they show an inclusion. And I think that's a good representation of life, because in life, you can't just, if you want to be someone who focuses purely on love, that's your choice. But at the end of the day, we all have a balance of everything. Like we have to balance stuff like our friends and families and work and all those things, and we have to balance love. So I think movies actually do a good job of like representing how they try to balance both. And okay, so a good reason why it's in children's movies is also because, again, it's good to expose these children to these kind of things from a young age. A new point that we want to bring up is that what about children that don't have loving parents? What about children that don't have loving people around them? When these people don't have loving people around them, or people who are at least not outwardly in love, where it's healthy but not the most like visible, they can see in these movies or get a sense of what it looks like. Like, for example, in minorities, where in our culture we're not really like expressive if I love. Like if you see your typical Asian parents, like they do kind gestures and acts of service for each other, but they don't like say I love you, or they don't say I love you the most, or they don't like are not that affectionate. So when you see this in movies, it's a good exposure or balance of exposure. So you see how your parents are in love, you see how Disney people are in love. I'll take one POI.
Yes, but this debate is about romantic storyline, right? If a person doesn't have loving family, they still can see familial relationship from the children's storyline, right? Please engage in the debate.
Okay. In general, like even if you wait. I don't see how that POI was relevant, because yes, you can see family related love lines, family love, to be exposed to family love, but if you don't have loving people around you, you can also see lovingness in movies. So I don't see how that's relevant. Let's go into why their side is ultimately worse. So throughout their entire side, they've never expressed why the kids would just be better off without the exposure to they've never explained why the kids on their side would be better off without exposure to these love lines. Like they've not said why the exclusion of it would particularly have exclusive benefits to the children. Whereas on our side, we tell you that when you exclude these things, what's going to happen? When you exclude these things, they are not exposed to them. As children, when you put these things in children's movie, it has to be filtered out. It has to be taught. It has to be packaged in a way that is like digestible and also comfortable for audiences. It's not gonna be too traumatizing, but at the same time, you can express mature themes in a proper way. For example, Anna got heartbroken in Frozen, but then so that's a relationship that didn't work out. But then Kristoff came along, and that's like someone proper who came to love her, which is something that's on the more mature side, something more recent, but it was packaged in a way that kids can perfectly digest. So having these sort of things portrayed in children's movies is a good thing at the end of the day, because why it's important is because as children, they're like vulnerable people. They need to learn from people, and what if they don't have other people to teach them? So these children's movies, including these kind of themes, will ultimately benefit them in the future. It's something to reference. And why it's a good reference is because even if it's idealistic, don't you want to have better views or like have higher standards than have lower standards of people who treat you badly, of people who don't treat you well? So at the end of the day, for a site that gives children better exposure, for a site that shows good standards of love, should be go with side closing opposition. That is my speech.
Thank you to the member of opposition for that speech. To conclude the government case, I'd like to invite the government whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I prefer chat PI. So I'll be beginning my speech. Hold on, need time. All right. So I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Finals, you need to realize that children movies are very important in teaching the youth generation. It plays an important role with the priority to teach moral values upon these children. The element of romance in children movie nowadays, our side has to prove that it brings more harm than it is, nowadays. Now, there are a lot of cases coming from both sides, and my job as government whip today will prove as to why closing government takes the win as of today. Now, starting off with a few rebuttals for the opposition side, but how it says that movies make a small exposure to love, about how kids are already exposed to love in the first place, or eventually will find love. But realize that they need to understand the distinction between love and romance. Those are like two different things. We're having a debate here. Love can be from family, it can be from friends. Romance is a whole different thing, where like you and the partner and showing like your affection towards them. So they need to realize that these are two different things that needs to be pushed. That needs to be distinct. Now, the next thing is about how these children are well exposed to love on their own. But you need to realize that most of them will be exposed to movie, because movies nowadays are the best medium to spread any information or ideas. Now realize, so when you implement these romance elements in these movies, you are exposing most of them to these elements. So you need side opposition needs to understand that movies make up the majority of exposure to children to certain ideas or like expectations. Now the next rebuttal is about how there's like apparently this government that like they have an extensive checking process about how how is this content good for like the audience of children or not. Realize that in this debate, we realize that this motion proves that it's like a moral like debate where like it already happened, and realize that the government actually approved these romance movies. So sure, like they want to say that there are no like bad content, like adult content in these like children movies, but we are here to fight about how romance element in movies already affected these children. So we don't see how that's relevant to the debate, because it already happens, and we are against the idea of having romance in this movie, not inappropriate things. Now, about the next part about how it gives an idea of what a healthy relationship looks like. Now, realize that throughout this debate, outside government has already provided two counters to upon which they propose about one. If they say it's a perfect and healthy relationship, we can say that it's very unrealistic and very naive for the children to believe so. And it provides them, and as my previous like government speakers have said before, like it provides them a very unrealistic expectation from when they want to do a relationship when they grow up. And two, if it was a toxic relationship, we always see like Frozen, where like these people, like these antagonists, like they have no like true like proper reason as to why they would commit such things, and thus there's no actual takeaway from these movies to begin with. Like there's no like red flags, like they want to say, like there are no like any signs of toxic relationship. So like these children cannot have any takeaway from like if it were to be a bad relationship to begin with. Now moving on to the deputy leader of opposition, about how like it gives the idealization of partners, about how like he looks at the husband like seeing it more handsome than he already is, like than he truly is. But I realized that like and she claimed it to be because like adult movies do it too, and like she tried to stamp it on like how adult movies like do it too, about how they like idealize like what's the look of like the perfect partners. But I realized that this is the children movies, and like the problem with you idealizing your partner is that it creates like far unreal expectations. Okay, now going on to my next rebuttal is about it's some that how she stated is something more complex and like shouldn't be hidden from children. Well, we believe that children are such like simple-minded, right? They're gullible and then they're very impressionable. So you're introducing something complex and base it off that they should get exposure. We say that it's really illogical to expose something so simple, someone who's very simple, to something so complex, just because you want to say that exposure is important. We believe that they should actually grow up and actually have a bigger and have a more mature mind to actually understand the situation, so they could at least gather the information more precisely and actually create a base reasoning as to why they think so. And before that, I'll take a
that seem perfect at first became toxic in the end? Doesn't that already show what a toxic relationship is and what a red flag is? Isn't that good for children?
Well, as I've said before, the antagonists in the story, all the antagonists in the story, they don't really have like a true a proper reason behind all of their their hate and all that. They don't have a proper reason. So even if the children wants to have a takeaway on what's a red flag and what's to take away of what's a toxic relationship, they have no idea of what it actually looks like to begin with. Because these the Disney company decides oh, this person is already bad, so he'll just cheat on him, cheat on her. So there's not actually any reason behind the reason of the antagonist being bad. It's just being said that this person is already bad to begin with. And then the next thing about how she said about how they will still experience heartbreak, about how these children will experience about how children will still experience heartbreak when they grow up, about how they break relationship. Well, I realize this is more severe on their side, because now they fail to meet the expectation of what an actual fairy tale looks like, because they think oh, I should confess to this person and he'll actually accept me and we'll live happily ever after. But oh, it didn't work. So now isn't this the part where I actually fail, and then this isn't how it's supposed to go? So we can say it's more severe on their side. And then how move on to the member of opposition, about how it says that movies are now more relevant, about how we base our movies on the old movies. Well, realize that the old movies are people still watch children are still being exposed to old movies, and how how opposition says that movies are nowadays more liberalized. Realize that there are the majority of the children movie industry is filled with they keep renewing old movies, they keep renewing Cinderella, they keep eventually they will renew Frozen, I suppose, and then they will still carry on these ideas about how the romance will go on. So I don't see how they only bring up the example of Turning Red will actually support their case, because there are still majority of movies that still consist of that still carry these messages from the past that they want to go against. Now the final thing I like to touch up about the rebuttal is about how there are romantic personalities, how they say they can have the perfect idea about how, but realize that all of these romantic how people fall in love because of their personality, they can easily be substituted by their friendship, how their relationship with friends, and we can prove that this is not mutually exclusive to their side. And with that, I'm proud to propose.
Thank you to the government whip for that speech. To conclude the novice semi-finals from Malaysia BP, I'd like to invite the opposition whip. Here.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, give me a second to set up my timer. My name is Varsha, my preferred pronouns are she, her. And my preferred method of POI is to type in the chat. If by the 5th minute I haven't taken it, feel free to unmute and just verbally say. Just 1 minute. Okay. All right. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. So, in my speech today, I am going to prove exactly how misconstrued the government's case is and exactly how out of touch they are with today's motion. Okay, so what are the main clashes in this debate today? Which side has the best has the most benefits for children, whether the romance element in kids' movies is necessary, and which world is better for the overall stakeholders, anybody who watches kids' movies, in this case, the audience. Okay, so moving on to some rebuttals, the Prime Minister had said that the Prime Minister and the member of government had said that these movies limit the themes, focusing on romance in kids' movies limits the overall themes in kids' movies, like friendship, family, personal growth. I would like to rebut that by saying that this is completely false. When you have the romance element in movies, we have to understand that the motion is talking about the addition of romantic elements in movies, not necessarily having it be the center. But even in movies where it is the center, like for example, Princess and the Frog, there is still a heavy emphasis on the main character's friendship with her best friend. That is a very big part of the movie, and it's not taking away from the friendship that they share. So that entire point just doesn't make sense, because there are so many movies, Lilo and Stitch, Rapunzel goes on a journey of self-discovery. She finds out who she is, where she comes from. There's still a romantic element. She still has her love interest, but it doesn't mean it takes away from her personal growth, from her family, from her friendships. All of these things, this quote unquote harm, just doesn't exist. Because in the end, such is life, right? Just because, even if it perpetuates, like as the government said, it perpetuates toxic relationships, if it perpetuates abusive behavior, and how in future relationships they wouldn't know how to navigate it. Like, harmful relationships still happen in their world, on their side. It doesn't stop harmful. What are they doing to stop harmful relationships from happening there? Not having romantic elements in Disney movies, they are advocating a world where if we don't have these romantic elements, then these kids will grow up not knowing what it looks like, good or bad. They will not have any sort of example. They will not have any, they will not be able to navigate it even more, right? And the notion that having expectations or unrealistic expectations is the most atrocious thing that happened is also so misconstrued, because they act like having expectations in the first place, having boundaries, having expectations and ideals in the first place is the worst thing to happen. Isn't it good that they have something to live up to in the first place? And even if it's aiming a little high, even if you fall a little short, you would still get to a really good place and you would still end up with a good partner. And it is not that these Disney movies do not portray realistic relationships. In the movie Lilo and Stitch, the older sister of Lilo has a lot to do. She's the sole provider for her family, and her love interest understands that, and it's such a healthy portrayal of romance and how he courts her in the movie. It's so nice to see, and it's definitely more healthy than a lot of relationships that we see in real life. And to be completely honest, the government side entire case is contingent on whether or not the judges and all of us buy into their skewed views on how children movies are conveyed. And the harms that they are portraying aren't actually harms. They are just over exaggerated downsides to movies. Downsides that were usually present in the older movies, older kids movies, and are now getting more and more progressive. We are showing an obvious progression of these movies, and they are getting better and better. Moving on to what the DPM said about Cinderella, the second movie where her stepsister and the baker are conventionally attractive people, and then they fall in love. Like, that is not true. That entire storyline is based on the fact that they are not conventionally attractive. Okay, it's Cinderella's ugly stepsister, and then she falls in love. That's great for her, that she managed to find a romantic partner in the end, that she doesn't feel alone. And the relationship between Cinderella and the stepsisters and her stepsisters, I don't see how it's relevant, just because they were horrible to her. That was explained in the storyline. It's not a good argument for today's debate. And moving on to how the DPM continued to say that kids will grow up feeling like you need to be in a relationship. That kids movies are not the root cause of that issue. There are so many factors that could contribute to that issue, so that argument also does not make sense. And they said that they were not trying to condemn romance as a whole, but at the same time, they are talking about how if you are exposed to romantic relationships at a young age, it will lead you into toxic relationships. You will not know how to navigate relationships, etc., etc. But our side has already proven that this is in fact not true, because the representation that they're getting through these movies are overall good, and they are getting better. Even if there is a little bit of bad representation back then, it does not mean that the majority of representation being given now is bad representation. So in the end, the entire government's case is based on something that it has a very minuscule possibility of happening in of itself. And moving on to how the government had said that it portrays heteronormative culture, that it portrays gender roles, stereotypes, all of these things. Again, even in movies like Mulan and Shang, like it is seen that they are in fact equals. And to answer the clashes, which benefits the children more? We on site closing opposition have told you that these kids get exposure, like the minority kids, and it might be their only exposure. It develops them as people because exposure to love and to romance overall is a good thing, and you understand how people ideally should be and how you should love. We've told you that it is absolutely necessary and good in children because it's and it's good because moving on, children should be exposed in a young age because it is overall beneficial to them, and they will have a good idea of what love and romance actually looks like. And to close up, our worst case scenario where the children are exposed to these toxic relationships is better than the government's best case scenario. Thank you.
Thank you to the opposition whip for that speech. Thank you to everyone for the debate. Please feel free to cross the floors virtually and move back to the main hall. So leave the breakout room. The results will be announced in the main call.
Thanks for the debate.
All right, thanks for the debate, guys.
Yeah, thanks for the debate. Bye.
Okay, good debate, guys. Thanks.